Good afternoon. Welcome back to the JAFFA podcast. Our topic today is going to be the striking of Donald John Trump, from the 2024 presidential election ballot in Colorado and the implications of that, but also some of the developments overseas and how they are affecting the U.S. Political system and what's going on here. You know, there's a lot of chaos going on. So before I get into either of those topics, I want to, as always, encourage you to go to the description and click on the link tree that will take you to all of the links to my different video hosting and social media accounts, whether it's Rumble, BitChute, or Odyssey. My Substack newsletter is there, as is my Subscribe Star if you want to tip me, and many, many more other links. You're always welcome to comment on whatever platform you're watching this or listening to it. And let's get right into it. So, look, what happened with Colorado, I think, sets a very dangerous precedent. And I think I'm repeating something that millions of people have already said. So I don't think you need me to understand that it's certainly something that is beyond the pale of acceptable intervention in the political system by the court and by the plaintiffs who brought the suit, who I think are an organization called CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. So they have engaged in this campaign to disqualify Donald Trump from running in 2024 on the grounds that he was violating the 14th Amendment and engaged in an insurrection, and that he has to be thrown out as a public official that was engaged in basically a rebellion against the U.S. government. Now, there's already been a case that was ruling on this. I think it was from 2010 that found that this is not really the meaning of the statute. It actually pertains to public officials, people who were, so meaning that nobody could really appoint Donald Trump if he was convicted. So that's another problem, that he hasn't been convicted of anything yet. So they're prematurely applying a statute, and that I believe is enough already to reverse this Colorado Supreme Court decision. But on top of that, even Ty Cobb, I was listening to some audio earlier, who is the former attorney for Donald Trump. Yes, it's also the name of a very famous baseball player from the early 20th century. But Ty Cobb said, yeah, this isn't really the meaning of the 14th Amendment. It's meant to prohibit such people from ever being appointed to a position like a cabinet position or other positions where they could influence government policy through direct action. I mean, I think that technically, if this were the other case, a lot of the events in the 19th century would have been very different, because after Reconstruction was ended in 1876, a lot of the people who were consequently elected back into public office after the Republicans decided to abandon Reconstruction were former Confederates. And, that is something people should think about, that the 14th Amendment was not really applied seriously back when it was just ratified and brought into being back in the 19th century. So the idea that it should be applied to today is really reaching deep into the bag of tricks in order to force Donald Trump off of the ballot. And that really is the meaning of this. And, there are people that I know who are deeply resentful of Donald Trump, and they happen to be on the conservative side of the aisle, specifically DeSantis supporters, and they don't see really a difference here. They to some extent, they sympathize with the issue, but they don't think that Donald Trump is exactly deserving of the sympathy of anybody, because they feel that his betrayals of the cause have justified any and also his missteps and mistakes have justified any repercussions that he's facing. But I happen to think differently, and I think the main reason for that is because the consequences of this would be pretty dire. Look, I'll tell you honestly, and this isn't something I was going to make a standalone video on. If I had to vote tomorrow in a Republican primary, I think I would lean towards voting for Ron DeSantis, and it isn't because I despise Donald Trump. I've mispronounced his name again, or called him the wrong name 2 times. But look, I'd be willing to vote for Donald Trump for the presidency again as well. But I think my preference is for Ron DeSantis. I think he's been the more effective elected official, and I would personally prefer him. But yeah, there are other candidates that I think I'd be willing to vote for, or that I'd consider in the primary. I'm not 100% locked in on Ron DeSantis, unlike other people that I know who are big Ron DeSantis supporters, like Pedro Gonzalez, who I know to some extent, and I've defended his reputation, and I hope that, in the future that he can, that he can get beyond what's going on right now. I think he's being victimized by a smear campaign by Trump supporters, by the way, against him. But besides Donald Trump, I'd probably agree to vote for Vivek Ramaswamy. There was a candidate who dropped out of the race, Doug Burgum, who I'd consider voting for. The other candidates, Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, and Nikki Haley, I think are all terrible candidates in their own way. Nikki Haley being the worst, partially because the media is fawning over her, and I believe they'd be supporting her because she would be so pro-war and so committed to intervention in the Middle East. And I don't think that the media really has, they have a conscience about that. Look, I'm a person, and I'm going to talk about some issues that I'm having with the Middle East right now. At the heart, I believe in non-interventionist foreign policy and ending foreign aid, including to countries that have depended on it, whether it is Ukraine, Israel, or Pakistan, for example, Colombia. Look, those are bedrock principles of mine, and I think she would actually take us very far in the wrong direction. And that's one of the reasons I think Vivek Ramaswamy is a good choice. He's not the perfect choice. I think that there's flaws in all of these candidates, but some of the flaws you can't overlook. And Nikki Haley is objectively terrible if you're coming at this race from a position like mine. A lot of the people I know who said that they would support her, it's exclusively because of her pro-Israel position, and that's really a small dimension of what really a president is supposed to do if we're talking about the position. Some people I know would literally just vote based on one position like that. I know plenty of people who would be willing to vote for a president given that they're sufficiently pro-Israel, and that's not really the reason that I would vote for a candidate. And then we're going to get, that sets us up to segue to the broader race. Who are the candidates? Look, if Donald Trump is disqualified and the Republican nominee is somebody terrible, absolutely awful, like Nikki Haley, I'm in real trouble, because the other criteria that I have, which I would say is actually the first criterion, is that I'm pro-life. I'm not going to vote for a candidate who's pro-choice, and if he was pro-life, I would definitely vote for Bobby Kennedy, but I can't do it. Look, I think there's a lot of people in the political system that are feeling alienating. I feel it too, and I feel it for different reasons. There's people who are traditional Democrats who feel alienated because they feel that Biden is not sufficiently pro-Israel, or that he's too pro-Israel, or that he's not doing enough to step in and stop the violence in the Middle East, or that he's not doing enough to step in and fight Hamas, or whatever other permutation you want. There's a lot of people disaffected, and I think part of the problem is that the Democratic Party for too long has tried to satisfy different constituencies that have contradictory priorities. And I believe all of the different American citizens have the right to support candidates that are in favor of their policies. I don't think because I'm Jewish and I happen to be pro-Israel, I don't happen to march to the same drum as the AIPAC supporters, or the AIPAC as an organization, or any of the other major Jewish organizations. In fact, I would say that there's probably an unseen part of the Jewish American public that doesn't support any of the priorities of any of these organizations, whether it's the ADL or AIPAC or whatever. They happen to have other beliefs, and I would count myself among them. But I would also add that it's not because I'm anti-Israel. I just think that their vision is horribly flawed, and I think that they're actually going to lead both Israel and the U.S. to disaster. And it's a principled stand. And I encourage people to listen more closely to things that I'm talking about, rather than just dismiss me as some sort of turncoat or bigot or whatever. I did my obligation to serve Israel as a son of two Israeli immigrants to the U.S. I was legally obligated as an Israeli citizen to go over there and do my service, and I did it. And while it wasn't exactly the most fulfilling experience, I feel like I did contribute something, and it gave me a perspective that's worth hearing. And I'm hoping for the best for everybody in both countries. And I wouldn't ever ask an American who's suffering. I walk through. I work in a manufacturing facility. I walk through the floor, and the conversation is so much different there than it would be on these college campuses that you hear about or see on TV. Or, they're not talking about events in the Middle East. People are talking about people in their family that have addictions. They talk about hardships in terms of economics, in terms of their education, in terms of problems that are much more mundane and germane to their life as Americans. And if they have political opinions, they generally don't have them because of ideology. They have it out of practical need. They are the real Americans that are ignored. And I support that tendency to address the needs of the people that are citizens of this country over the needs of other countries, even if I do believe that those countries are deserving of sympathy and aid, right? I think that they have to pay for that aid. They shouldn't get it for free. They should also have to stand on their own 2 feet as much as they can. It's one of the reasons that I supported Rand Paul in the past and would support him again. Look, Ron Paul is one of the people who led me to the viewpoints I have today. Doesn't mean that I agree 100% with every position that he takes, but ultimately I believe that he's closer to the truth than the people that are endlessly calling for more intervention. And then on the other hand, so on the Democratic side of the aisle and on the left, there is greater and greater disaffection with the Democratic Party's position. And look, I think that there was disaffection that was there before the October 7th attacks and the beginning of this stage of the Israel-Palestine conflict. But it has ruptured a lot of the big, unhealed wounds. That it's torn open wounds that have not healed, ones that have been papered over by big tent Democratic vote getting. The Democrats believe that you can have contradictory aims and still be in the same party, and the conflict will just be resolved out of political expediency. That's not the case. And I was just reading about a meeting in Detroit. It was a holiday party that was thrown on behalf of local politicians and party activists in Michigan's 13th congressional district, which I think is the southern part of Detroit, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. And that's a district of Sri Thanadar, who is an Indian American congressman and thought to be a progressive, but he's been staunchly on the side of Israel during the conflict. And you can argue maybe he's on the side of Israel because he's a sellout, which could very well be true. I looked into some of his previous positions from before he was elected to Congress, and I think if people want to call him a sellout, they can call him a sellout. But the tenor of the protest was beyond just, it was like they invaded this private party. Okay, I get it. You don't like it that the activists are having this private holiday party, and actually started to spar with some of the attendees and muscle them up and demand that they call for a ceasefire and bully them around. And the the party goers didn't take kindly to that, so they shoved them back and out of the party and summoned the police to arrest them, and then the demonstration was broken up. Well, then they went over to the home of Sri Thanadar and started yelling at him through bullhorns in the middle of the night. So I can tell you that is a sign that things are not all well within the Democratic Party. I don't know whether Sri Thanadar is going to lose his primary election, which is only a few months away. I think Michigan tends to vote in March, if I remember correctly, sometime in the middle of March. So I do believe that if Michigan becomes this focal point for grassroots rage against Democratic politicians, there's going to be a big story in that. Look, primaries are a crucial season when activists are able to often illustrate how much hold they have over the party. If they can drag a candidate over the line, they can steer the policy position of the party in one way or another. And I experienced that in a congressional race in my district. I've seen other people, there's been other races like in Pennsylvania, in the Pittsburgh area, where that was seen and the pro-Palestine side went out. And there have been, on the other hand, there have been other races where the opposite occurred, like in Maryland, where there was a congressional race where I think this guy named Glenn Ivey won. He was the more pro-Israel candidate compared to a candidate who was deemed to be insufficiently pro-Israel. Look, I think that jockeying for every single seat in Congress over whether they support this side or the other side in the conflict in the Middle East is a broken system, for Americans especially, because, if you're voting in American legislative elections on the basis of positions of a question happening overseas, are you really holding the priorities of the local constituents to be at the top of the list, or are they basically getting the shaft? And that was the point of a lot of the officials that went to the party. There was one activist who was one of the anti-party activists, who she said that basically these are older black people, they're older and more conservative, they don't represent the needs of the black community, they are more bourgeoisie and conservative, and she was basically writing off an entire segment of Detroit's population. And look, I think you should be able to criticize every institution. Then I went and looked at her background. Her name, I think, is Sammy Lewis. And she's a member of the Communist Party. So, lo and behold, a member of the Communist Party is basically trying to intervene in the affairs of the Democratic Party. And I think that this has been done before. And it could be that in the near future, Sri Thanadar will be primaried successfully and ousted in favor of a candidate who is more militantly pro-Palestine, or I guess he's not pro-Palestine at all anymore. This is a big rupture in the party. And I think district by district, you could end up seeing in the future that there will be this slow creep of actual pro-Palestine activism into the houses of Congress. It started more earnestly with the election of the 4 congresswomen in 2018 that are known as the Squad, but more voices have been added to that, including Jamal Bowman, who is that congressman from New York who is famous for having pulled the fire alarm for no reason. Suddenly, when there was supposed to be a vote to be had, he decides, I'm going to pull the fire alarm. It's because I wanted to open the door. So that's one of the people. And there's also Summer Lee from the Pittsburgh area, and there's a few other people. And gradually, I think if this position starts to gain hold in Congress, then the whole enterprise of continuing to demand U.S. aid to Israel will be less and less viable, because the Democrats will have to, if they're in control of Congress, obviously the Republicans could remain in control of Congress, and they have less of this problem than the Democrats in terms of getting uniformity on this issue. There's only one guy who tends to vote against this, and I actually support his position, Thomas Massie, who says he's against foreign aid, period. Look, the Democrats, as they may have more of these people who are winning primaries in their party, they might have to corral Republican votes in order to be able to pass aid packages to Israel, and they might decide at some point it's not even worth it. Screw it. We're trying to look after our interests as a party, not after the interests of these people who are only one pressure group that's out there. And I think that will end up being the trend. I don't know how long it'll be until it actually reaches its logical conclusion and they're not able to get enough votes to pass these aid packages. Maybe it'll never happen, but I also don't believe that the financial health of the U.S. is really strong enough for those aid packages to remain meaningful in the future. At some point, I think inflation is going to go out of control. I think that you're going to have a realization that no, this isn't really a sustainable policy, even if it isn't a massive portion of the deficit. Both parties are going to start to say, hey, we need to start cutting from certain segments, like what we're going to spend on what. And I think this will come up. And I don't believe that this bedrock principle that people talk about is really going to be as rock solid as they claim it is. And that's why I've been advocating from a pro-Israel perspective and from a pro-America perspective that the countries decide to mutually end this practice, that they don't give military aid to Israel, which is intended to serve as corporate welfare to the defense contractors, that Israel either buy the weapons straight up or develop their own weapons and figure out a way to eliminate this dependency. Right now they're waiting on, this is what people fail to realize, they're waiting on a $14 billion emergency aid package that's caught in legislative hell, because the Democrats don't want to release it without this even bigger allocation for Ukrainian aid. So it's really a question of how much are you going to keep asking before you realize that that's one of the real reasons that you're so weak. I believe that the Israelis got to this position where they're faced with this horrific fighting in the South, in the Gaza Strip, and the horrible cost of life that it's taking. It's taken a horrific cost of life for Israelis. It's taken an even more horrific cost of life for Palestinians. I have compassion for the innocent in both respects, but I'll get to that in a minute. Like what's an innocent casualty and what's not an innocent casualty. But yeah, I think that honestly, the tide is turning. There is consistently higher opposition in polling, especially among younger Americans, to continued U.S. aid to Israel. And the LA Times, George Skelton wrote a piece about it a couple days ago. He was stunned that in California, the majority of California Democrats, particularly younger Democrats, are against U.S. support for Israel. Why should he be stunned? He should be aware that this is the case, that younger people are rejecting this relationship. They have a different set of values than maybe Democrats had in the past, even though, to be honest with you, I'm a little surprised it's taken this long to get to the point that it is, because a lot of this ideology, this quote unquote anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism, which I don't think either of them are apropos. Neither of them are really the case. Neither of them are anything new. They were worming their way into the Democratic Party years and years ago, and people were only blind to it because they were ignoring it. They weren't facing the truth. They wanted to see the world with rose-colored glasses. Moving on to the situation in the Middle East, there's a couple of flashpoints, well, more than a couple, but a few that I wanted to highlight. So the Red Sea is currently a big theater where the Americans are going to be apparently tangling with the Houthis, who are this Yemeni Shiite movement. I think that they're descended from the same clans of people, but they've basically been strangling shipping in the Red Sea, and I don't know what the options are besides intervening. Those that say let it happen, whatever, so your solution is that you allow a group of pirates to strangle shipping whenever they disagree with something else that's going on. The natural response is, well, all they want is for the violence in Israel and in Gaza to stop, and they want the Israelis to stop bombing the Gaza Strip. But I don't believe it because they've been fighting wars for over a decade, and it's irrespective of anything that's happened in either Israel or the Gaza Strip. They're simply people who, they have a militia, and they continue to fight to take control of all of Yemen. I think they only control the northern part of Yemen, what used to be called, or I think it is the original boundaries of the Yemen Arab Republic. The southern part used to be the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. So you have a big issue here where people are not really understanding the issue as a whole. Look, if the U.S. could solve this without intervening, I would totally be on board. Unfortunately, I think that you can't allow a group of pirates to strangle shipping between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. That's just not something. And look, when the Somalis were doing it, a decade ago, maybe it was even longer ago. I mean, I remember it. I don't remember exactly when it started to die down. People weren't as vocally against dealing with Somalis as they are now. And what happened with the Somalis has much less to do with U.S. intervention. Somalia fell apart due to its own internal problems. It wasn't so much an issue of American intervention in Somalia. But these are issues of international trade and commerce that have to be resolved. You can't allow a group like this to strangle shipping between the Middle East and Europe and Asia. Now, I don't know if people have a more creative solution in their mind. Maybe they can send it to me or whatever. If they're saying, all they have to do is stop firing on Gaza or whatever. Well, I don't really believe that. I believe that even if Israel were to cease fire and stop fighting entirely in Gaza, I think the Houthis would still try to blockade Israeli shipping from going between the Mediterranean or I guess Israeli ports in Eilat and Southeast Asia. Also, the Houthis were hijacking ships that had virtually no connection to Israel anyway. So the notion that this is just a matter of Israel is absurd. Again, like who cares what the Houthis think, right? Why are they involved in this period? They don't even share a border with Israel. That's the big question. Like, why are they butting into the conflict? The other flashpoint is on the Lebanese border with Israel, and that could also develop into a full-scale war in the next few days. And really, the root of that is that the United Nations has not enforced the resolutions where they call upon Hezbollah to stay away from the border and maintain its distance and allow UN peacekeepers to occupy the border area. Instead, the Hezbollah units have basically taken positions along the border and are actively engaged in skirmishes with the IDF, and they've lost, both sides I believe have lost people, but Hezbollah has actually lost I think over 100 people to different IDF attacks or responses. So that's a big flashpoint. What about the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Well, the West Bank is continually being raided over and over again, day after day. It's one of the reasons I don't think that long term there has to be some sort of resolution to it, because this has been going on for many, many years. It was this way when I was in the military, but it was also this way before I was in the military. And until now, it's been tolerable for many people because nobody's paying attention. However, in the future, I don't know if people are going to be okay with this going forward forever, that you'll just have raids over and over and over again into the West Bank. So there might have to be an actual reoccupation of the West Bank if they want to root out the terror groups, just the same as they did in Gaza. It's just not going to be quite as difficult because these are disconnected cities that are largely surrounded by checkpoints and different barriers and things like that. So pacifying the West Bank totally would take less effort if the focus was enabled than it did in Gaza. It's just that the appetite to do it might be diminished. But in long term, I don't believe that Israel can continue to control the West Bank forever. They're going to have to find somebody to basically pawn off this white elephant on. And I know people will come into my comments, and some of them will say, "Are you an idiot? Like, are you trying to say that this is the Palestinians' fault, or are you an idiot? Are you trying to get Israel to give up Judea and Samaria, which should be sovereign Israeli territory?" Look, I don't have the answer. I'm saying that what has been going on for years is clearly not the answer. The status quo is not the answer. Something has to change. And in my opinion, somebody else is going to have to administer, maybe a foreign entity. I mean, if possible, it would have been Jordan. I don't know if they can do it either. This is a problem that has been allowed to fester for years. The Gaza Strip, by contrast, Israel is already largely, I believe that they are winning the war. Now, there are people like Jeremy Scahill are trying to make a case that the war is not going well for them because they didn't reckon that the resistance would be this great. Look at the statements of Israeli officials, as untrustworthy as they may be, even for people like me. But they were saying at the beginning of the operation this could take months, and it has now been about it's going on 3 months, and most of the Gaza Strip has basically been either occupied or isolated. The city of Gaza has basically been almost entirely consumed by Israeli forces. There's a couple pockets left. The Jabalia neighborhood, not the refugee camp, but the neighborhood has basically fallen. So the main pockets of resistance are Shajaya and Tufah and a couple other neighborhoods, but largely the Hamas fighters and their allies have given the ground. They've lost it, and they've had a lot of people surrender, and I'm going to get to that in a second. And the southern city of Khan Yunis has been surrounded completely, and the IDF is working their way through there. So those are the two largest cities. The smaller cities are going to be next, and they're not going to wait until they're done with I don't know their plans entirely, but they're not going to wait until they're done with Gaza City entirely in order to move into some of the other territories and completely break off the different municipalities and areas of Gaza from each other. And the time is fast approaching when Hamas's control will be entirely underground, and that's like the real key, that so much of their military infrastructure is underground. There's a big question as to how Israel will be able to defeat that, but defeat it they must, and I think that they will eventually make it such that Hamas is not going to be able to restore its power after the war. They'll maybe, I don't know if there will be a remnant left. I think the goal of eradicating Hamas altogether, it sounds a little ambitious, but, it's closer today than it I mean, definitely than it was a couple months ago. And now we get to the issue of these surrenders and like disputes I've had online with people like Kim Iverson and Daniel McAdams, the head of the Ron Paul Institute, where they try to say, well, these people are not combatants. In fact, some of them, like the ones who surrendered at Kamal Adwan Hospital in Gaza City, in Jabalia, they one of them is a medical resident. Well, one does not, being a medical resident does not disqualify you from being a terrorist. There's something that I responded to McAdams. I said to him, yeah, but Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda for so many years, after Osama bin Laden's death, he was a pediatrician. The fact that you have another profession besides whatever activity you have in a terror group, that doesn't disqualify you. It doesn't give you a pass. Like if I was to, I mean, the thing that reminded me of the most is like when Serena Williams was playing a tennis game and she faulted and she disputed it with the judge, and she yelled at him because she said, "I'm a mother and I would never lie," or she said, "I have a daughter and I would never lie." As if that means anything. Like what are you talking about? It's a non sequitur. And increasingly, since that has emerged, now there was, after a week, I mean, they were disputing it last week that these people were actual terrorists or combatants. Well, the hospital managing director confessed under interrogation, and it didn't seem to be particularly harsh interrogation, because in the video he seemed perfectly calm and collected, and had like a fluent conversation with his conversation partner, his interlocutor, if I can use that word. I don't think I've ever used it in conversation, but he was having a perfectly normal conversation, and he confessed. He said, yes, I was an activist. He said he confessed that he was in Hamas. He confessed that Hamas was using the hospital. He confessed that it had its own facilities in the hospital, that it would interrogate people, that it would bring, it would have special phone lines for Hamas members. He knew that 16 members of his staff were either members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad's military branches, which are the Al-Qassam brigades and the Al-Quds brigades. He confessed to all of those things, every single thing. Now, some of them were still saying, well, this is a confession under coercion, right? So we don't have to believe it. But most people, if they watch the video, they understand it wasn't because he was being beaten or anything that this guy said what he said. He was not being, there was no gun held to his head. He didn't seem to be particularly agitated. I think in some cases people surrender, they become relieved because they were under stress when they were fighting, right? So they actually get to take a break. You go to like some people, they go to prison. It's actually better than their real life because, let's face it, some of these criminals live in a pretty poverty-stricken existence. But basically, some of them shifted, and particularly Kim Iverson, into saying, well, so what if it was a military base that was cloaked in a civilian hospital? So what? Does that justify Israel's killing of civilians there? Well, no, it doesn't. And is that not a war crime? Well, I answered her. I said, yeah, it's a war crime. It's a war crime on the other side. It's a war crime on Hamas, because you are not allowed to take civilian directed infrastructure that's meant to be a resource that's off limits for the adversary to strike. So hospitals and ambulances and medical clinics and churches and other things, you're not allowed to use that as either a refuge or a staging area for armed activity in any shape, way, or fashion. Now, you could have, for example, in a hospital, you could have combative patients. So I think it would be perfectly reasonable if the hospital had security guards and that they had sidearms or I don't know. I mean, it's a little hard to imagine that they would be able to defend that hospital with sidearms from armed groups, but conceivably, there's this issue where Sorry, I'm turning right now and waiting for this car to go. Conceivably, there is a reason that a hospital could need security, but they didn't need, as this guy confessed, 16 members of Hamas, many of which are doctors, nurses, and orderlies and other hospital employees who are on the staff, who were all trained and members of the military. And people like Kim Iverson, it's a matter of sophistry. They are ideologically committed to the side that they're advocating for. And unlike, I'll tell you what, I mean, I have many criticisms of Israel, of Zionism, of the Israeli government, of Netanyahu, of the vaccine policy of Israel, of the immigration policy of Israel, of the social policies of Israel, of all of the, of the foreign aid going to Israel. I think that if you listed all the list of all of the criticisms that I have of Israel, you could probably make a couple of notebook pages, and they're criticisms because I try to be fair to everyone. If I'm overcritical of the Palestinians, I'm sure that I'm going to hear about it, and I'll just justify my position. I don't expect you to take my word from it simply because I don't expect you to take my word for it simply because you listen to my channel or you've fallen on this video. And I admit that I could be wrong, but the fact is that Kamal Adwan Hospital was a center of terrorism and abuse of hospitals as a military staging area. That is a war crime on the part of Hamas and Islamic Jihad if these allegations are further proven to be true. I think that the proof is already strong enough already because they surrendered at the hospital. They gave up their weapons at the hospital. There's no evidence that the weapons were planted. So that's just an accusation without evidence. The evidence is all that they were holding the weapons and they were giving them up. There is no evidence that the weapons were planted, as I hear all the time from these idiots who think that just because you accuse somebody of something that's evidence. And then, I'll just throw in one last thing. The Kamal Adwan, the person the hospital was named after, was himself a terrorist. He was a member of the Black September organization and Al-Fatah in the 1960s and 70s, and he was one of the organizers of Black September's terror campaign at the time, including the Munich Olympic massacre. And they name a hospital after a terror leader who engaged in actual instances of terror. If you look at Israel, I don't believe that there's as many cases of terrorism. Granted that there are people like Menachem Begin that you could say engaged in terrorism, and that's worth a discussion, right? So if you want to point out criticism of Israel as a contrapoint of what I'm talking about right now, I'm fully willing to engage in it, but I'm not going to play these games where you say they planted the weapons. It's totally fine that they use the hospital as a military base. It's really Israel's fault because they forced them to take refuge in the hospital because of the occupation. And there's endless arguments about this. It's pretty clear at this point that there are people who would be willing to justify anything that the Hamas and other allied Palestinian groups do because they hate Israel, because it's simply a matter of them hating Israel. It has nothing to do with saving Palestinian lives. And I count Jeremy Scahill and Kim Iverson and many other people on that side. They don't really care about the lives of Palestinians. As usual, please like, share, and subscribe, and follow me on all the different social media and video hosting sites, whether it's Rumble, BitChute, or Odyssey. My Substack newsletter is also in the link tree, as is my Subscribe Star if you want to tip me, and you're always welcome to comment, and have a great night.